Nelson Dellis is one of the most intriguing people I know. He was inspired to improve his memory after watching his grandmother's sad decline due to Alzheimer's. He now holds a number of memory records, including the U.S. international record for memorizing a deck of shuffled cards in 40.65 seconds, the U.S. international record for memorizing the most digits in 5 minutes, with 339 digits memorized, as well as the most names memorized in 15 minutes, 201 names. He's the 4-time USA memory champion and currently ranks 26th in the world as a memory athlete. He's also a superb mountain climber with 2 attempts on Everest and summits on Alaska's Mount McKinley, amongst many other big mountains around the world. Nelson grew up in England, France, and the United States. He speaks both French and English as native languages. He attended high school in Florida and went on to major in physics and minor in mathematics at the University of Miami. He worked as a veterinary technician, and then, after earning a master's degree in computer science, he worked as a software developer. But now, with his shift into memory expertise, he's busy staying in mental shape for competition and teaching people around the world how they can improve their own memories. In fact, there's evidence that there are people out there with exceptional memory abilities who are not trained. You can take part in the tests that scientists at Dart Neuroscience have developed to see how you stack up against Nelson and all the others who've taken the test so far. More about that later. It's such a pleasure to be interviewing you here today, Nelson. I have to say, I have a ton of questions I've always wanted to ask a memory expert. But first, I want to show our viewers just a little bit of your memory prowess. I'm going to read a list of 25 single-digit numbers, and let's see if you can remember them.
Okay, just make sure to ring them out at like 1 per second.
Okay. 8, 7, 8, 4, 2, 1. Alrighty, we've got them.
Let me just review in my mind. Okay, all right, so starting from the beginning, it was 8, 7, 8, 3, 7, 1, 3, 8, 4, 4, 6, 0, 4, 8, 8, 6, 8, 7, 3, 9, 6, 2, 4, 2, 1.
How did you do that? What?
This is also as impressive. I can do it backwards if you want. So 1, 2, 4, 2, 6, 9, 3, 7, 8, 6, 8, 8, 4, 0, 6, 4, 4, 8, 3, 1, 7, 3, 8, 7, 8.
Oh my word. I'm really impressed. I wish I could do that. That's pretty amazing. Now, I understand that you developed this kind of expertise by using a memory system, that you're not a natural memory expert. Is that right?
That's right. This is something that I taught myself many years ago. Before that, I just had an average memory, and I trained at using memory techniques and a lot of practice. And it's interesting, a lot of people just assume that I have a natural memory or I was born with it. So they're always surprised to hear that it's actually something trained. We're actually there are people looking for people who have those natural skills. It's a point of interest to see if that exists out there.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the system that you use to remember numbers? How much practice do you have to put in every day to keep up with this kind of system? And is it the kind of thing that's useful or worthwhile for an ordinary person to do?
Yeah, so keep in mind I'm training for competition, so I take it to the next level. It's my profession, it's my work, so I take it very seriously and spend hours a day training. But when I started, it was just a hobby, and I think for the everyday person who maybe struggles with memory, they'd want to hear that it takes a very short amount of time to get good at these techniques. You don't have to spend hours, is what I'm saying. But there are some things that are harder than others. For example, numbers requires a bit of prep. Basically, the way I do it is I'll come up with pictures for all these different numbers so that every time I see a number, I think of something else that's more familiar to my brain. So if you were going to learn a number system and you wanted to get very good at numbers, you would have to put in a bit of prep time, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to do these memory techniques.
I like that. That sounds like it's something that's doable by normal human beings.
Totally, yeah.
But I'd like to shift now to something that I've always had a little bit of trouble with, and that's remembering names. What kind of techniques do you have for memorizing names?
Yep, so that's probably the most common question I get because that's probably the most useful everyday thing is how do I remember the name of someone I met or meet? So the idea is, well, basically any memory technique involves two things in my opinion. One is visualization, so turning whatever you're trying to memorize into a picture, a mental picture that's filled with associations that mean something to you, right, to yourself. The second thing is to attach that image to some location. There are different ways you can do that. The most common is this thing called a memory palace, where you use a familiar place like your house and you attach these images to a bunch of different locations around a path in this place, your house. And the idea being is you remember your house, so it's easy to pick up where you left all of these things and you can remember things in order easier. For names, it's a bit different because people come in and out of your life, so you don't know where or how or if you should store a certain person. You may not ever see them again. So what happens is you use some distinguishing feature about them as the location to store the image for their name. So when I meet someone, I always ask, first I pay attention. That's kind of the first thing. Then I'm focusing in on something about their face or body or their composure, and whatever sticks out I go with. That's my location, that's my anchor. And then I ask for their name and I turn that name into whatever it reminds me of. It sometimes could be a friend who has the same name, a celebrity, a cartoon character. It could maybe be a name that sounds like an object, or it just could be something it feels like, or I break it down into smaller pieces and that reminds me of something. It's all a bit of practice. But once you have that picture, you can attach it or imagine it on that person's distinguishing feature so that when you see them again, they come to you bringing that location and the image for their name along with them.
This is really helpful for me, but I have to admit my special difficulty is in memorizing names rapidly. For example, if I'm introduced to 5 people consecutively, I might get the name Mary and the name Miguel, but by the time they've gotten through all 5 names, I've forgotten the other 3 names. The real problem is I'm just not a quick thinker. So by the time I come up with some kind of memorable gimmick, I've already missed the other couple of names.
Sure.
So any advice for people like me?
Yeah, and that's common. I mean, it's not easy to do that, what I just said, very quickly. I'm not even amazing at it. If you rapid fire 5 to 10 names at me, I may not get all of them. I need to take time and make those images memorable. So what I recommend in situations like that, because that happens a lot at parties where someone's like, hey, Joe, this is Bob, Steve, Agnes, whatever, right? And it's just this quick introduction and you're flustered and you barely remember anything. So what you do is go and talk to these people one by one and don't be afraid to ask for their name again. I mean, if they expect you to have to retain all of those names really fast, I mean, who can do that? So the key to remembering names is also not to be embarrassed to ask from the beginning, though. That's the key. You don't want to ask for their name, after 2 or 3 times having met them, right? And you just keep avoiding and saying, hey, guy, or hey, madam, you know. So it's one of these things where, say you didn't catch all those names, I would go reintroduce myself, say like, "Hi, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. What is it?" And then as you kind of have a back and forth conversation, you can in your mind be then taking your time to come up with this picture at your own pace.
I see. That's very helpful. Now, sometimes there are people like Bill Clinton, and I mean Bill Clinton is uncanny in his ability to remember people's names. Even people he hasn't seen in like 10 years, he can instantly seem to recall their names. But for me, if I haven't seen a person after, say, 3 years, I have real problems. I just can't recall their name very quickly. And I can't be practicing. I've got a lot of other things to do, and I never know who I might encounter. So, any advice for this kind of situation?
Yeah, you know, a person like Bill Clinton, you know, some people just have a knack for certain things, and I think he has a knack for that. Obviously, it's very important for him too. I mean, it's important for everybody, but I think especially more so for him. Um, and he's just a people person, you know, and I think that helps when he's the kind of person who will like get to know everybody who he meets, no matter how important or not. That helps. Memory is all about paying attention, and if you spend a lot of time on one thing, you're gonna remember it better. Now, that's not to say that you don't give a anything about the person you meet. You know that you care. Obviously, so do I. But we all work differently. And what I would recommend in those situations, and I do this because I'm not the best. I have to try and make the effort. So what I'll do is usually, for example, when I get business cards, you know, I'll do the thing where I'm memorizing everybody's name, but then afterwards, I make sure to take their business cards, review, even write little notes on the cards themselves, just stuff that stuck out about this person. You know, oh, we had this conversation about Mount Everest. You know, they were tall, had short hair. I really liked the way he smelled, or something like that. You know, just like stuff that was important to you and that comes out when you write it down, what you remember. And I keep a file of those, and I'll go through them every once in a while. It's actually a fun game to me because it reminds me of how many people I meet and how well I can remember them. And it becomes this game, and I think that makes it a lot more fun and easier to remember names.
Memory is a key aspect of learning, but it often seems that becoming a memory expert involves learning a number of different kinds of systems, and all of these systems take a lot of practice, and they're only useful for specific types of memory, for example, cards or numbers or faces. Many of the learners in our course, however, they want to do things like memorize complex equations or problem-solving techniques. They want to remember the meaning of complex philosophical terms or monstrously convoluted verb conjugations. I mean, in Russian, we used to say that for every rule there was an exception, and for every exception there was a rule. So, what kind of advice do you have for memorizing difficult theoretical concepts that are outside the boundaries of the kinds of things that are ordinarily memorized?
Right. So, you know, let me first say that in competitions we memorize specific things, cards, numbers, names, because there has to be a way that we can uniformly test everybody on the same level every year, right? But you can't at the same time have an event or have a competition that figures out a way to test you on every possible way to memorize every possible thing. So the way I look at it, the way I tell people is, you know, we go into these competitions having trained specifically cards, names, numbers, and it's almost like when you go to the gym, right? You're training to be healthy and fit overall, but you go in and you do specific exercises that do work on a specific muscle set, right? Like your biceps and your quads or whatever. And the goal is that all around it'll prepare you to be able to be active in any way in real life. So the same thing with memory is we do all these things, but it helps us kind of round out our memory and allow it to be able to memorize something like complicated equations or philosophical terms or whatever. So for those types of things, the memorizing process is really the same. I know there are complex systems, but that's if you want to get to a really high level, and most people don't need to. The basics are this: is one, come up with a picture. So if you're looking at equations or philosophical terms, you're going to approach it the same. How do I turn that complicated thing into a picture? And by picture, like I was saying with the names, it can be anything. It doesn't even have to do anything with what it actually is. I mean, you could be looking at an equation and the symbols look like, a seahorse and a shovel, doesn't matter. The point is you want to turn what's abstract and complicated into something that and your brain already has hardwired in its brain. Then afterwards you can insert meaning and understanding and all these things and comprehension. But the goal is come up with a picture. The second thing is to store it somewhere. Use, like I was saying, a memory palace, somewhere where you can access this information at will. But I think the tricky part, especially for this complicated things that you're mentioning, is coming up with the picture. And that takes a bit of practice, but we're all capable of it. We're very imaginative beings, and I think we can all come up with things on the fly if we really let ourselves.
Well, let's switch focus a little bit now from equations to text. Let's say that you have a complex or simply a very long section of text that you want to memorize. For example, the lengthy text that's involved in questions on interviews. So I should point out that this kind of thing is especially difficult for me when I'm a little bit nervous on camera.
Yeah, with text, it's difficult because there are a lot of words and a lot of little intricacies and filler words and well, if you're reading it and trying to remember it, just generally the idea of what's being said, that's okay. You can pick out keywords and memorize those, or the general phrases or concepts. If you're memorizing a speech word for word or a poem word for word, that's when those little words, obviously in between, of, and, or, so, those are important too. But they're two different kind of approaches. I mean, if you're just trying to memorize a text in general to know the points, it just becomes what I was saying before. Find these, maybe underline these key words, these key points, and now you've just reduced this text to a list of words or groups of words. And then that just becomes turning those into pictures and storing them in a memory palace.
I see. So any advice for people who are getting a little bit older? How can they work to help keep up their memory skills?
Yeah, there's a few things. One, I really try to stick to 4 kind of key dimensions of brain health. So at this point, what I like to promote is really brain health rather than memory techniques. Obviously, that's a part of it, but I got into this because of my grandmother and Alzheimer's, and she had Alzheimer's, and I wanted to improve my brain health for the rest of my life. So what I do is, one, is keeping my brain active. So, not everybody wants to be a memory champion, but you can try to memorize things. If people give you numbers or you have groceries to get, try to memorize it. Don't write it down. Learn a new skill. There's so many things out there, and I'm sure so many people want to try new things and they say, oh, I can't do it, but try, right? These are the things that activate our brain and really get the juices going, and will keep your brain healthy. Secondly is being active, so physical activity, and you don't have to be weightlifting crazy amounts or sprinting or anything, but just being active is very good for the brain. Third is being social, so involving yourself with friends and family and your community has been shown to be very helpful for brain health. Not being in solitude and a recluse is helpful to be out with people. And then finally, and this is very important, especially as we age, is diet. The things we eat obviously impact our body and our brain. And one of the main things, and this I suggest this to anybody, because I do it every day, I take about 1,000 milligrams of DHA omega-3, and it's you might be familiar. It's what we might get if we ate salmon or fish, certain fish, fatty fish, or fish oil pills, right? But that's a very important part to my diet, and I believe that those are the keys to maintaining brain health, and that can be applied to at any age.
I think all of these kinds of ideas are right in line with the things that we've been talking about in this course. So, do you have any last bit of suggestion for people to help improve their ability to learn and remember?
Yeah, a few things is, I think when we were younger, there was always, when we were learning things as kids, we were playful, always coming up with imaginative things, and we looked at life very joyfully and relaxed, right? And I think you lose that obviously as you age a bit because you have responsibilities and you get into a job and all these things. But that's where memory really, I think, springs from is our kind of inner child, And it's nice to explore that at times. And I think to have a good memory, you need to kind of let go and explore that world a little more, being more creative and a bit silly, a bit fun, and you'll find your memory improves. That's one thing. The other thing is part of my mission is to try and get memory and understanding of memory and brain health to be something of the past, so that we can all have healthy brains in the future. And I work with this company, Dart Neuroscience, and they have this awesome kind of research program where you can log in and take a little memory test. It spans over 2 days, but it's very short. And it's a memory game that people take. And what we're doing is trying to get as many people as possible to take it, millions if we can. And the goal is to try and find people who have just naturally good memories. Because people look at me and I've trained. That's one thing, but we really want to look at people who have this naturally, if that even exists. If they don't, that's also very enlightening. So one thing is to be playful and childish and try to tap into your inner memory. The other thing is to please participate in this, we call it the Extreme Memory Challenge. And people can log in. It's extremememorychallenge.com. And you'd be participating in a really great cause to hopefully end Alzheimer's or end cognitive impairments.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time today to speak with us, Nelson, and I strongly, strongly encourage all of our viewers to enroll in the Extreme Memory Challenge. I think it could be a really an enhancement and help a lot of researchers who are working in a very, very important area. So again, my great thanks to you, Nelson, and best of luck in your future championships.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.